Have you ever wondered what would happen if everything you believed about your most sacred book was completely wrong? What if the stories you know by heart, the characters you revere, actually concealed dark secrets deliberately hidden for centuries? Imagine an earth-shattering archaeological discovery that rocks the very foundations of faith. Not an ancient tomb, not a forgotten relic, but a secret library containing texts removed from the Bible. These ancient pages reveal a different truth, a distorted history, where heroes might be villains and great events were built upon a foundation of lies. Would you dare to confront a truth that could shatter your every belief? Welcome to a journey of uncovering buried secrets, where the past is not as we thought, and the truth could ignite a revolution of faith. Dare to question everything. Join us on Jesus and Tomorrow, as we uncover these buried secrets, where the past is not what you think, and truth could revolutionize faith. Like if this intrigues you, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Jesus and Tomorrow for more mind-bending discoveries. The desert wind howled like a tormented spirit, lashing sand against Elias Thorne's weathered face as he gestured towards the half-buried archway. "This is it," he declared, his voice barely audible above the wind's lament. "The Serapeum of Akhenaten. If the legends are true, what lies beneath could rewrite history." Dr. Ben Carter, wiping sweat from his brow with a skeptical grunt, surveyed the desolate landscape. "Legends, Elias. We've chased whispers across half the globe. I'll believe in this lost library when I see it filled with actual books, not just more sun-baked pottery." "Ben," Elias countered, his eyes gleaming with an almost fanatical intensity, "the Coptic tablet, the linguistic anomalies, they all point to something significant here. Akhenaten's heresy, his sudden shift to monotheism. It left too many unanswered questions. What if this library holds the answers the Orthodox history deliberately concealed? Sarah Miller, the youngest member of the team, but arguably the most astute linguist, adjusted her glasses, her gaze fixed on the crumbling stones. The inscription, it's unlike any standard hieroglyphic form. There are elements, almost proto-Semitic, intertwined with symbols I've only seen in obscure Gnostic fragments. She shivered, despite the oppressive heat. "It feels ancient, Elias, dangerously so." Elias exchanged a look with her, a shared understanding of the potential gravity of their discovery. He trusted Sarah's instincts. Her intuition had guided them to crucial breakthroughs before. "Danger is inherent in uncovering truth, Sarah, especially when that truth challenges established power." The arduous work of excavation began. Hours crawled by under the relentless Egyptian sun, punctuated by the rhythmic clang of tools and the strained grunts of the workmen. Ben, despite his initial skepticism, directed the operation with his usual efficiency, his archaeological instincts kicking in as they unearthed more of the archway. "Look at this," Ben called out, brushing sand from a section of the stone. "These carvings, they're not typical Akhenaten-era imagery. See these intertwined serpents, this solar disk with wings? It's a syncretism I haven't encountered before. It's as if two distinct belief systems merged here." "Exactly," Elias said, his excitement mounting. "Akhenaten's monotheism might have been far more complex, far more influenced by pre-existing traditions than we realize. And if this library contains texts from that period..." Finally, the passage was clear. A dark, narrow moor descended into the earth, promising both discovery and peril. Ben's usual jovial facade had completely vanished, replaced by a grim focus. He checked his headlamp, his beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. "All right, Professor, let's see what secrets these sands have been guarding." As they ventured into the passage, the air grew thick and still, the silence broken only by the echo of their footsteps. The passage opened into a series of chambers adorned with faded frescoes, depicting Akhenaten and his family worshipping the Aten. Then they entered the library. A collective gasp filled the chamber, row upon row of shelves miraculously intact, stretched into the gloom, an endless labyrinth of forgotten knowledge. The sheer scale of it was breathtaking. By all the gods, Ben breathed, his usual cynicism utterly eclipsed by awe. I've never seen anything like it. Sarah moved slowly, her headlamp illuminating the spines of countless scrolls and codices. The material, it's mostly vellum, Elias. In this condition, it's unprecedented. She carefully picked up a scroll, her fingers tracing the unfamiliar script. This language, it's not purely Egyptian. There are phonetic elements, connections to early Canaanite dialects, perhaps even something older. The initial wonder soon morphed into stunned disbelief as they began to examine the contents. Sarah, her brow furrowed in concentration, deciphered a passage from a fragmented scroll. Listen to this. It speaks of the creation, but not as we know it. It describes multiple creator deities, a council of the divine, and a figure called Yahweh as a secondary being, almost a rebellious son. Ben's eyes widened. That contradicts everything, the Genesis narrative. It's foundational. Elias felt a cold dread creeping into his heart. If these texts were authentic, they would shatter the accepted timeline and origin of Abrahamic religions. He approached a shelf filled with codices. His hand gravitated towards the one bound in dark leather with the silver clasp. It felt strangely resonant, almost alive. As he carefully opened it, the script within was unlike anything they had seen. "This is different," Elias murmured, his voice hushed with reverence and trepidation. "The language, it's almost primal. Look at these symbols, Sarah. They appear to predate even the earliest forms of written language we know." Sarah leaned closer, her breath catching in her throat. "They resemble certain esoteric symbols found in very early mystical traditions, but intertwined with what appear to be names. Names we recognize." She pointed to a sequence of symbols. "This, if my tentative decipherment is correct, this could be Jesus. And this symbol beside it, it's strikingly similar to an early representation of the serpent." A stunned silence descended upon the chamber. The implications were staggering. Could this codex offer a radically different perspective on the central figures of Christianity, a perspective that turned millennia of accepted dogma on its head? Ben ran a hand through his thinning hair, his usual pragmatism struggling against the overwhelming evidence. "This is insane, Elias. It's like finding a completely different version of reality." "Perhaps," Elias said slowly, his gaze fixed on the cryptic script, "we are finally seeing the original reality before it was edited." Suddenly, a loud, scraping sound echoed from the entrance passage. The team froze, their headlamps swinging towards the darkness. "Did you hear that?" Ben whispered, his hand instinctively reaching for the small trowel on his belt. "We're not alone," Sarah breathed, her eyes wide with fear. Elias felt a surge of adrenaline. They were in a remote, supposedly uninhabited location. Who else would be down here? Had their discovery been noticed? Were there others who sought to protect, or perhaps exploit, the secrets of this lost library? The scraping sound came again, closer this time, followed by muffled voices. The whispers in the sand had led them to a truth far more dangerous and complex than they could have ever imagined. The book of buried secrets was open, and it seemed the world was not yet ready for its revelations. The muffled voices grew louder, closer, sending a jolt of urgency through the small team. Elias extinguished his headlamp, plunging them into near-total darkness, the faint ambient glow from their discarded equipment providing the only illumination. "Who is it?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know," Elias replied, his own heart pounding in his chest. "But they know we're here." Ben, ever the pragmatist, moved swiftly but silently towards the passage entrance, his ears straining to discern the source of the intrusion. "Sounds like more than one, and they don't sound like tourists." A beam of light suddenly pierced the darkness, sweeping across the chamber. "Hello," a gruff voice called out in Arabic. "Is anyone down there?" Elias exchanged a tense look with Ben and Sarah. They had registered their expedition with the local authorities, But this didn't sound like a routine check. The tone was too demanding, too possessive. "Stay quiet," Elias mouthed. "Let's see what they want." The light grew stronger as several figures entered the library, their headlamps cutting through the gloom. They were a mixed group, dressed in a combination of local garb and more tactical-looking gear. Their faces were hard, their eyes scanning the rows of ancient texts with an unsettling intensity. The leader, a tall man with a weathered face and piercing eyes, spoke again, this time in heavily accented English. "We know you are here. You have found something. Show us." Elias stepped forward slowly, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "We are archaeologists. We have made a significant discovery, yes, but we have followed all proper channels." The leader's eyes narrowed. "Proper channels? This place is forbidden. You should not be here." "We had permission," Elias insisted, though a knot of unease tightened in his stomach. Had their permits been revoked? Had someone anticipated their discovery? "Permission can be revoked," the leader said with a cold smile. "Now what have you found?" His gaze flickered towards the shelves laden with scrolls. "Something old?" Ben stepped forward, his protective instincts kicking in. "We've just begun to document our findings. It's too early to say anything definitive." The leader's demeanor hardened. "Too early? We have been waiting for this place to be found for a long time. You will show us what you have uncovered." He gestured to his men, who fanned out through the library, their movements far too purposeful for a casual encounter. Elias knew they were in a precarious situation. These men weren't just curious locals. There was a sense of authority about them, a feeling that they had a specific agenda. Could they be connected to the very forces that had sought to bury this library in the first place? "Look, we are scientists," Elias said, trying to buy time. "Our priority is to preserve and understand these artifacts. We need time, proper equipment." The leader cut him off. "Time is a luxury you do not have. We know about the texts, the alternative gospels, the secrets they hold." His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. How could they know? Had whispers of Elias's research reached these shadowy figures, or had they been monitoring this site all along, waiting for someone to finally unearth its treasures? One of the men, who had been examining a cluster of papyrus scrolls, let out a sharp exclamation. "Look at this! It mentions the bloodline, the true descendants." The leader's attention snapped towards the scroll. He moved quickly, snatching it from the man's hands. His eyes scanned the ancient script, his expression unreadable. "What does it say?" Elias pressed, a sense of dread washing over him. The mention of a bloodline. It echoed certain esoteric theories, fringe beliefs about the hidden lineage of Jesus or his followers. The leader didn't answer immediately. He carefully rolled up the scroll, his grip tightening on it. "You have stumbled upon something you do not understand, Professor. Something that could shatter the faith of billions." "That is why it needs to be studied, understood," Elias argued. "These texts can provide invaluable insights into the early history of Christianity, the diversity of beliefs." "Diversity is dangerous," the leader hissed. "Unity is strength, and these texts, they threaten that unity." Suddenly, another group of men appeared at the entrance passage, their faces grim, their movements even more coordinated than the first. They carried more sophisticated equipment, and Elias noticed a few of them were armed. The leader of the first group nodded to the newcomers. "They are here. Secure the library. No one leaves." Elias knew they were trapped. This wasn't just about recovering ancient artifacts anymore. This was about control, about suppressing a version of history that someone desperately wanted to keep buried. "Who are you?" Elias demanded, his voice filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. "What do you want with these texts?" The leader smiled, a chillingly serene expression. "We are the guardians of the true faith, and these are falsehoods that must be contained, for the good of mankind." As the armed men began to move through the library, their presence a stark violation of the sacred space filled with ancient knowledge, Elias knew that their discovery had placed them in the crosshairs of a power far older and more formidable than he had ever imagined. The whispers in the sand had led them not to enlightenment, but to a dangerous confrontation with the shadows of history, shadows that were determined to remain hidden. Their quest for truth had just become a desperate fight for survival. Panic clawed at the edges of Elias's composure, but he forced himself to remain outwardly calm. He knew that any sign of resistance would be met with swift and brutal force. Ben, though his face was grim, stood his ground, positioning himself slightly in front of Sarah, a silent act of protection. "Guardians of the true faith?" Elias echoed, his tone laced with skepticism. "By what authority do you claim that title, and who decides what constitutes falsehood?" The leader's smile vanished, replaced by a steely gaze. "Authority is not something we claim, Professor. It is something we wield, and the truth has been safeguarded for centuries. You have stumbled upon a deviation, a dangerous distortion that was rightly excised." One of the newly arrived men, dressed in a dark, well-cut suit that seemed incongruous in the dusty library, stepped forward. He carried himself with an air of quiet authority, and his eyes, sharp and intelligent, assessed Elias and his team with clinical detachment. "My name is Silas," he said, his voice smooth and cultured. "We understand your curiosity, Professor Thorne. Your dedication to history is too commendable. However, some doors are best left unopened. Some truths are too volatile for the masses." "Truth should never be suppressed," Elias retorted, his voice rising with indignation. "These texts could revolutionize our understanding of the origins of Christianity." Silas tilted his head slightly. "Revolution is often synonymous with chaos, Professor, and in matters of faith, chaos can be catastrophic." He gestured towards the armed men. "We will be taking possession of these materials. You will be escorted back to the surface. I suggest you consider this matter closed." "You can't just confiscate historical artifacts," Ben protested, stepping forward. "These belong to the world." Two of the armed men moved swiftly, flanking Ben, their hands resting ominously on their sidearms. Silas raised a hand, silencing them. "We are not without understanding, Dr. Carter," Silas said, his tone deceptively reasonable. "We recognize the significance of this discovery. Therefore, we will ensure these texts are properly cared for, studied even, in a controlled environment." "Controlled by whom?" Sarah interjected, her voice surprisingly firm. "By those who want to bury the truth again." Silas's gaze turned to Sarah, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "By those who understand the delicate balance of faith and history, Miss Miller. A balance that you, in your pursuit of academic curiosity, threaten to disrupt." Elias knew they were outmatched. Arguing further would be futile, perhaps even dangerous. He had to play for time, to find a way to understand who these people were and what they truly wanted. "Very well," Elias said, his voice carefully neutral. "If you insist on taking possession of the library, we will cooperate. But we request to be present during any study of these texts. Our expertise could be invaluable." Silas considered this for a moment, his sharp eyes scrutinizing Elias. "A reasonable request, Professor. Perhaps a limited collaboration could be arranged. Under strict supervision, of course." He gestured to his men. "Begin cataloging the codices. Handle them with extreme care." As Silas's team began to meticulously gather the ancient texts, Elias, Ben, and Sarah were escorted to a less crowded section of the library, still under the watchful eyes of the armed guards. "What do we do?" Sarah whispered, her fear evident. "They're going to take everything." "We can't let that happen," Ben growled, his fists clenched. "There has to be a way to get these texts out." Elias surveyed their surroundings, his mind racing. The library was vast, a labyrinth of shelves and shadows. There had to be another way out, a hidden passage, something the newcomers hadn't yet discovered. "We need information," Elias said quietly. "We need to understand who Silas and his people are, what their agenda is, and we need to find a way to communicate with the outside world." "Our phones won't work down here," Ben reminded him. "Too deep. But Akhenaten's architects, They were ingenious, Elias mused. A secondary entrance, a ventilation shaft large enough to squeeze through. We need to look for anything out of the ordinary. While Silas's team continued their work, Elias and his colleagues began to subtly explore their immediate surroundings. They ran their hands along the ancient shelves, searching for loose stones or hidden mechanisms. They examined the faded frescoes on the walls, looking for any depiction that might offer a clue to the library's layout. Suddenly, Sarah stopped, her fingers tracing a barely visible line in the plaster behind a large shelf. "Elias, look at this. It feels hollow." Elias and Ben joined her. Pressing against the section of wall, they felt a slight give. With a concerted effort, they managed to push the heavy shelf aside, revealing a narrow, darkened passage. A glimmer of hope sparked within Elias. Akhenaten's architects were known for their secret passages. Before they could react further, Silas's voice echoed through the library. "Professor Thorne, Miss Miller, Dr. Carter, I require a word." They quickly pushed the shelf back into place, the hidden passage concealed once more. They exchanged nervous glances. Silas's sudden summons could mean he suspected something. They found Silas standing near the entrance, holding the dark leather codex Elias had examined earlier. His expression was intense, his sharp eyes boring into Elias. "This codex," Silas said, his voice low and grave. "The language, it's unlike anything we've encountered. And the symbols, they are potent." He opened the codex carefully, revealing a page filled with intricate symbols and the strange flowing script. "Do you understand any of this, Professor?" Elias hesitated. He had only just begun to decipher a few of the recurring motifs. Revealing his limited knowledge now could be a mistake. "I recognize some similarities to early mystical symbols, as my colleague mentioned, but the language itself is unknown to me." Silas studied his face intently, as if trying to detect any hint of deception. "This codex, I believe it holds the key to understanding everything here. Its secrets must not fall into the wrong hands." He closed the codex, the silver clasp clicking shut with an ominous finality. "For now, Professor, you will remain under our supervision. You will assist us in understanding these texts. But you will not leave this place, not until we have determined the full extent of your discovery and its potential impact." Elias felt a chill run down his spine. They were no longer just discoverers, they were prisoners. The shadows in the sands had enveloped them, and the cipher of ancient secrets held them captive. Their only hope now lay in unraveling the mysteries of the library and finding a way to escape the grasp of those who sought to control its dangerous truth. The game had changed, and the stakes had become terrifyingly high. Days turned into a tense routine. Elias, Ben, and Sarah were confined to a small section of the library, their every move watched by Silas's armed guards. They were given rudimentary food and water, their pleas for contact with the outside world ignored. Their only solace was the occasional opportunity to examine some of the less enigmatic scrolls under Silas's watchful eye, a carefully controlled trickle of information. Silas and his team, which included several linguists and scholars of their own, were primarily focused on the dark leather codex, poring over its cryptic script and intricate symbols. They worked with an almost frantic intensity, as if racing against time to unlock its secrets. One evening, as the guards were changing shifts, Sarah managed to slip away unnoticed for a few precious moments. She rejoined Elias and Ben, her eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "I saw it," she whispered urgently. Silas was reading from one of the scrolls, a gospel, but it wasn't Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. It was attributed to Mary Magdalene. Elias's heart skipped a beat. The whispers of Mary Magdalene's true role in early Christianity had always intrigued him, the scant historical evidence hinting at a far greater influence than the traditional narrative allowed. "What did it say?" he pressed. "What did it reveal?" "I only saw fragments," Sarah replied, her voice low. "But it portrayed her as a central apostle, a confidant of Jesus, entrusted with teachings the others didn't receive. There was a passage. It described a vision she had after the crucifixion, a private revelation of the resurrected Christ that she then shared with the other disciples. Peter, he seemed to question her authority, but Jesus himself rebuked him. Ben's eyebrows shot up. That completely contradicts the canonical accounts. Peter is always portrayed as the leader, the rock upon which the church was built. This gospel, Sarah continued, it paints a different picture of the early church, a community where women held positions of significant leadership. It even implied that Mary Magdalene was closer to Jesus than any of the male apostles. Elias felt a surge of adrenaline. This was explosive. If this gospel was authentic, it would not only rewrite the history of early Christianity, but also challenge centuries of patriarchal interpretations of Scripture. "Did you see anything else?" Elias asked, his mind reeling with the implications. "There was a passage about the inner circle," Sarah recounted. Jesus apparently had a small group of his closest disciples, Mary Magdalene and two others whose names I couldn't quite make out, who were privy to deeper, more esoteric teachings. Teachings about the true nature of reality, the illusion of the material world. This resonated with Elias's understanding of early Gnostic leanings within some early Christian communities. Could this lost gospel provide a link between the teachings of Jesus and these mystical traditions? Their hushed conversation was abruptly interrupted by the harsh glare of a guard's flashlight. "What are you three whispering about?" They quickly dispersed, feigning sleep or quiet contemplation. The brief glimpse into the gospel of Mary Magdalene had planted a seed of profound doubt in Elias's mind. The true faith Silas spoke of seemed to be one that had been carefully curated, with dissenting voices and alternative narratives deliberately suppressed. The following day, Elias was summoned by Silas to observe the translation of a section of another scroll. This one was written in a form of early Aramaic, and Silas's linguist was struggling with certain idiomatic phrases. As Elias offered his insights, he subtly steered the conversation towards the content of the scroll. It appeared to be an account of Jesus' ministry, but with significant deviations from the canonical Gospels. There were no accounts of miracles in the traditional sense. Instead, Jesus was portrayed as a profound teacher, his wisdom and understanding of the human condition, his primary power. "Notice here," Elias pointed out, feigning academic interest, "the absence of any mention of divine birth. The emphasis seems to be entirely on his human wisdom, his connection to the divine through knowledge and understanding." Silas observed him closely, his expression unreadable. A different perspective, certainly, one that ultimately did not prevail. "But why not?" Elias pressed, carefully maintaining a tone of scholarly inquiry. Why were these alternative perspectives deemed heretical? What was so threatening about them? Silas's eyes hardened. "The truth, Professor, is what has endured, what has been tested by time and the consensus of the faithful." "But consensus can be manufactured," Elias countered, the words slipping out before he could fully censor them. "History is written by the victors, is it not?" A tense silence hung in the air. Silas's gaze was like ice. "Are you questioning the very foundations of your faith, Professor?" "I am questioning the selectivity of history," Elias replied, meeting Silas's gaze. "I am questioning why certain voices were amplified while others were silenced. What if the heretics held a piece of the truth that has been lost?" Silas did not answer directly. He simply nodded to his linguist to continue the translation. But Elias had seen a flicker of something in his eyes, a hint of unease, perhaps even a shadow of doubt. Later that day, Ben, while ostensibly helping to organize some of the heavier codices, discovered another hidden compartment behind a section of shelving. Inside, carefully wrapped in linen cloth, were several small, intricately carved wooden boxes. They managed to open one of the boxes during another brief moment when the guards were distracted. Inside, nestled on a bed of dried herbs, was a collection of small metallic seals, each engraved with a unique symbol. "What are these?" Ben whispered, examining one of the seals. The symbol on it was a stylized star with 7 points, surrounded by a circular inscription in the unknown language of the dark leather codex. "I don't know," Elias admitted, "but they feel significant, like some form of authentication or perhaps keys." Sarah examined another seal. "This symbol, I saw it in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. It was associated with a specific teaching, something about the interconnectedness of all things. Could these seals be connected to the hidden teachings of the inner circle? Could they unlock further secrets within the library?" As they carefully reconcealed the wooden boxes, Elias felt a growing sense that they were piecing together a puzzle far larger and more complex than they had initially imagined. The library wasn't just a repository of lost texts, it was a vault of suppressed knowledge, a testament to a battle for the very soul of a burgeoning faith. And they were trapped in the middle, caught between the guardians of a carefully constructed history and the potentially earth-shattering truth that lay buried within the shadows of the Serapeum. The whispers of heresy were growing louder, and the Magdalene secret was just the beginning. Silas's focus remained firmly fixed on the dark leather codex. He brought in other experts, scholars fluent in obscure languages and symbology, but the codex remained stubbornly resistant to complete decipherment. Its language seemed to be a unique blend, drawing from multiple ancient sources, yet forming a lexicon and grammar all its own. One evening, Elias was unexpectedly summoned to Silas's makeshift study within the library. Silas sat behind a makeshift table, the dark codex open before him, illuminated by a single oil lamp. His expression was a mixture of frustration and intense concentration. "Professor Thorne," Silas began, his voice low, "you mentioned recognizing some symbols within this text. Anything further come to mind?" Elias approached cautiously. He had been deliberately vague about his limited understanding, fearing that revealing too much could jeopardize their precarious situation. However, perhaps a carefully controlled disclosure could serve their purposes. "I noticed recurring motifs that bear resemblance to certain early Ophita Gnostic beliefs," Elias said, choosing his words carefully. "Symbols associated with the serpent, not as a force of evil, but as a bringer of knowledge, a liberator from ignorance." Silas's gaze sharpened. The serpent as liberator, a radical interpretation to say the least. "It was a prominent belief in some early Christian circles," Elias explained. "They saw the serpent in Genesis not as tempting Adam and Eve to sin, but as offering them the knowledge of good and evil, the spark of consciousness that separated them from mere automatons." Silas leaned back in his chair, considering this. "And you believe this codex aligns with such views?" "The symbols suggest a strong connection," Elias replied. "There are depictions of the serpent intertwined with the tree of knowledge in a way that is celebratory rather than condemnatory. And there are references to a demiurge, a lesser creator god who keeps humanity trapped in ignorance, a concept central to many Gnostic systems." Silas was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the open pages of the codex. This presents a significant challenge to the Orthodox understanding of Genesis." "Indeed," Elias said carefully, "if this codex offers an alternative creation narrative, one where the acquisition of knowledge is seen as a positive step and the God of the Old Testament is viewed with a more critical eye, it would undermine the very foundation of Judeo-Christian theology." Silas finished, his voice grave. "The fall, original sin, the need for redemption through Christ, as traditionally understood. This was a crucial opening. Silas, despite his claims of protecting the true faith, seemed genuinely troubled by the implications of the codex. Perhaps his understanding of that true faith was more nuanced than Elias had initially assumed. These alternative interpretations were prevalent in the early centuries of Christianity. Elias continued, "They were ultimately deemed heretical and suppressed, but they represented a significant intellectual and spiritual current." "And you believe this library holds evidence of that current?" Silas asked. "I believe it holds evidence of a different origin point," Elias countered. Perhaps a tradition where the serpent wasn't the villain but a guide, where knowledge wasn't a curse, but the path to enlightenment. Silas rose and walked slowly around the table, his gaze sweeping over the shelves filled with ancient texts. If what you say is true, Professor, then the early history of our faith was far more fractured, far more contested than we have been led to believe. Precisely, Elias affirmed. And understanding those lost perspectives could offer profound insights into the evolution of religious thought. Suddenly, one of Silas's linguists rushed into the study, his face pale with excitement. "Silas, we've made a breakthrough with another scroll. It corroborates Professor Thorne's interpretation of the serpent. It describes the luminous one taking pity on humanity, trapped by the blind Creator, and offering them the fruit of wisdom." Silas's eyes widened. He turned back to Elias, a look of intense contemplation on his face. This changes things. Later that day, while they were being escorted back to their confined area, Sarah pulled Elias aside. "Remember those metallic seals we found? I think I've figured out one of the symbols. It appears in several of the scrolls, often associated with the concept of hidden knowledge or inner understanding. The Ophite idea of gnosis?" Elias mused. "Perhaps," Sarah replied, "and I think those wooden boxes, they might have contained the seals of different early Christian communities, each with their own interpretations and teachings." Ben, who had been listening intently, chimed in. "If that's true, this library isn't just a collection of individual texts. It's a snapshot of a period of incredible theological diversity, a time before a single, unified doctrine was enforced." The realization was staggering. The true faith Silas sought to protect might be a later construct, a carefully selected and edited version of a much more complex and multifaceted spiritual landscape. The serpent's shadow in the Genesis narrative, the rift between orthodox and alternative interpretations, seemed to run deep through the very foundations of their understanding. That night, sleep was elusive for Elias. He lay on his makeshift cot, the weight of their discovery pressing down on him. The implications of an alternative Genesis, a benevolent serpent, and a potentially flawed creator God were immense. It would not only challenge religious dogma, but also raise profound questions about the nature of good and evil, knowledge and ignorance, and humanity's place in the cosmos. He thought about the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the emphasis on inner knowledge and the potential suppression of female leadership in the early church. He thought about the absence of traditional miracles in the Aramaic scroll, the focus instead on Jesus' wisdom and humanity. And now, the echoes of Gnostic thought, the serpent as a symbol of enlightenment, the carefully constructed edifice of his own religious understanding, built over years of study and ingrained cultural beliefs, was beginning to crumble. The Book of Buried Secrets was not just revealing lost history, it was forcing a radical re-evaluation of the history that had survived. And Elias Thorne, the seeker of forgotten truths, found himself standing on the precipice of a revelation that could shatter the faith of billions and redefine the very essence of what it meant to believe. The serpent's shadow had fallen upon the garden of established dogma, and the fruit of forbidden knowledge was ripe for the taking. As Silas and his team continued their intense study of the library's contents, Elias, Ben, and Sarah found themselves increasingly isolated. Silas, while occasionally seeking Elias's linguistic expertise, maintained a guarded distance, the weight of the revelations within the scrolls seemingly pressing heavily upon him. One afternoon, however, Silas approached Elias with a different demeanor. He seemed less guarded, almost troubled. "Professor Thorne," he began, his voice softer than usual, "we have found something, a series of fragmented minutes, apparently from early church councils. One in particular. It refers to a gathering in a city called Nicaea." Elias's mind raced. The Council of Nicaea, in 325 AD, was a pivotal moment in Christian history, the council that formulated the Nicene Creed and addressed the Arian controversy regarding the nature of Christ. What could these lost minutes reveal? "What does it say?" Elias asked, His curiosity piqued. Silas unrolled a fragile fragment of papyrus. It speaks of heated debates, not just about the divinity of Christ, but about the very canon of Scripture. There are references to numerous Gospels and epistles being considered and ultimately rejected. Rejected, Elias echoed. Which ones? Silas pointed to a section of the fragment. The Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Thomas, several others we have found here. They are explicitly mentioned as being deemed unorthodox and ordered to be suppressed. Ben, who had been listening, let out a low whistle. So, this wasn't a natural selection process. The canon was curated. More than curated, Dr. Carter, Silas said grimly. These minutes suggest a deliberate effort to establish a unified doctrine, and any texts that deviated from that emerging orthodoxy were systematically excluded. Sarah stepped forward. But why? What was the motivation behind such a drastic measure? Silas sighed, running a hand through his hair. The minutes are fragmented, but the underlying reasons seem clear. The early church was fractured, riddled with diverse interpretations and conflicting beliefs. To solidify its power, to create a cohesive and unified entity, a single, authoritative narrative was deemed necessary. Dissenting voices, alternative viewpoints, they were seen as a threat to this nascent unity. So, the true faith you spoke of, Elias said slowly, wasn't the original faith, but the one that emerged victorious from this theological battle. Silas met his gaze, a flicker of conflicted understanding in his eyes. It would appear so, Professor. The consensus we have inherited was forged, perhaps even imposed. The implications were staggering. The Bible as they knew it, the very foundation of Christian belief for billions, might be the result of a deliberate act of selection and suppression, a winnowing of diverse voices to create a single, dominant narrative. The fragmented minutes also hinted at the reasons why certain texts were rejected. The Gospel of Mary, with its emphasis on female leadership and inner spiritual knowledge, likely clashed with the emerging patriarchal structure of the Church. The Gospel of Thomas, with its focus on Jesus as a wisdom teacher rather than a miracle-working deity, challenged the developing doctrines of Christ's divinity and the need for salvation through his death and resurrection as traditionally understood. There's another passage here, Silas continued, pointing to a different fragment. It speaks of guardians of the sacred texts, individuals tasked with ensuring the purity of the doctrine and the removal of any dissenting materials. Elias felt a chill run down his spine. The men who had captured them, Silas and his organization, could very well be the modern-day descendants of these guardians, continuing a centuries-old mission to protect the carefully constructed narrative. Did the minutes mention anything about consequences for those who possessed or promoted the suppressed texts? Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. Silas nodded grimly. There are vague references to measures taken and the eradication of dangerous teachings. It doesn't go into detail, but the implication is clear. Those who clung to the rejected Gospels faced severe repercussions. This explained the secrecy, the deliberate burial of the library. It wasn't just about preserving knowledge. It was about hiding evidence of a theological conflict that had been brutally resolved. The revelation about the Council of Nicaea and the deliberate canonization of Scripture sent a shockwave through Elias, Ben, and Sarah. It forced them to confront the possibility that the Bible they knew and respected was not the complete or unfiltered truth, but a carefully edited collection of texts that served a specific theological and political agenda. Later, as they tried to process this information in their confined area, Ben voiced the question that was weighing heavily on all their minds. If the Bible we have is incomplete, possibly even manipulated, then what else have we been told that isn't true? The concept of heresy itself takes on a different meaning, doesn't it? Sarah added. If the heretics were simply holding on to alternative interpretations that were later suppressed, were they truly wrong? Elias looked at his colleagues. their faces etched with a mixture of disbelief and dawning understanding. Their archaeological discovery had unearthed not just ancient texts, but a forgotten chapter in the history of their own civilization, a chapter that revealed a power struggle at the very heart of their faith. The Council of Nicaea, a symbol of unity and doctrinal clarity, now appeared in a different light, as a moment of decisive action where certain voices were silenced and a specific version of truth was enshrined. The forged consensus had shaped the world they knew, and the echoes of the suppressed voices in the Serapeum were now challenging its very foundations. The quest for truth had become a quest to understand the origins of belief itself. The revelation about the Council of Nicaea cast a long shadow over their understanding of Silas and his organization. They were not just guardians of ancient texts, they were protectors of a specific historical and theological narrative, a narrative that had been carefully constructed and maintained for centuries. The fragmented minutes from Nicaea also contained a cryptic reference that continued to intrigue Elias. Amidst the debates about scripture and doctrine, there was a brief mention of a lineage or bloodline that some argued held a special authority, a direct connection to Jesus that superseded even the apostles. This reference was quickly dismissed and condemned as a dangerous idea, but its very presence in the council's deliberations was unsettling. The scroll Ben had discovered earlier, the one that had caused such a stir among Silas's men with its mention of the bloodline and the true descendants, took on a new significance in light of this information. Elias managed to subtly inquire about it during one of his carefully monitored interactions with Silas. "That scroll your man found, the one that mentioned a bloodline," Elias said, feigning casual curiosity. "Did it elaborate on that concept?" Silas's expression immediately hardened. "That is a matter that does not concern you, Professor. But if it pertains to the early church," Elias pressed, "it could help us understand the context of these other texts." Silas's gaze was piercing. "Some knowledge is not meant for all. The concept of a privileged bloodline. It has led to schisms and heresies throughout history. It is a dangerous notion that the council rightly condemned." Despite Silas's dismissiveness, Elias sensed a deep unease surrounding the topic. It was clear that the idea of a bloodline connected to Jesus was not just an ancient heresy, it was a threat that still resonated with Silas and his organization. Later, while sorting through some recently translated fragments, texts deemed less sensitive by their captors, Sarah stumbled upon another piece of the puzzle. It was a fragment from a letter, purportedly written by a contemporary of the apostles. The writing was passionate and argued vehemently against the emerging emphasis on Peter's authority, claiming that James, the brother of Jesus, held a more legitimate leadership role due to his familial connection. "Listen to this, Elias," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide. "Are we to forget the very flesh and blood of our Lord? Is not his own brother a pillar of the true faith, a living testament to his teachings in a way that no mere follower can be?" Ben frowned. "James, he is mentioned in the Bible, but his role is relatively minor compared to Peter's." "Perhaps," Elias mused, "that is another instance of historical revision. If there were factions within the early church who believed in the primacy of Jesus' family, their influence might have been deliberately downplayed in the canonical narratives that emphasized Peter's apostolic succession. The idea of a bloodline, coupled with the potential prominence of James, the brother of Jesus, began to form a disturbing picture. Could there have been a power struggle within the early church, not just about doctrine, but about legitimate leadership and the very inheritance of Jesus' legacy? The dark leather codex continued to be Silas's primary focus. One day, Elias was surprised when Silas requested his presence not for linguistic help, but for his historical perspective. "Professor," Silas said, gesturing to a particularly complex passage in the codex, "this section, it speaks of the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman in a way that is allegorical, yet also strangely literal. It suggests a continuing conflict between two lineages, one tied to the knowledge offered in Eden, the other to a different kind of promise. Elias studied the passage carefully. The language was dense and symbolic, drawing heavily on imagery from Genesis, but twisting it in unexpected ways. This aligns with some Gnostic interpretations that saw the two seeds as representing different spiritual paths or even different races of beings, Elias explained. The seed of the serpent could be interpreted as those who embraced knowledge and challenged the authority of the demiurge, while the seed of the woman might represent those who remained obedient to the traditional creator god. But the text also seems to imply a physical lineage. Silas pressed, pointing to a phrase that mentioned blood mingled with starlight, a descendant of the woman who would ultimately triumph. Elias hesitated. This was venturing into highly speculative territory, the realm of esoteric beliefs and fringe theories. Some interpretations within these traditions did speak of a spiritual lineage, a line of enlightened individuals who carried the true knowledge. Whether that was also interpreted in a literal biological sense, that is less clear. Silas was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the cryptic text. The scroll mentioning the true descendants, it spoke of specific families, names that have echoed through history, sometimes in positions of power, sometimes hidden in the shadows. He looked up at Elias, his eyes filled with a strange intensity. What if the conflict within early Christianity wasn't just about doctrine? What if it was also about lineage? About who had the right to interpret and carry forward the true legacy of Jesus? The implications of Silas's question were profound. Could the suppression of certain Gospels and the emphasis on a specific apostolic succession have been linked to a desire to marginalize or even eliminate a rival lineage, a family that claimed a more direct connection to Jesus? The burden of proof for such a claim would be immense, requiring not just these fragmented texts, but corroborating evidence from other historical sources. Yet, the whispers within the Serapeum were planting seeds of doubt, suggesting a far more complex and politically charged origin for the Christian faith than the traditional narrative allowed. The bloodline, once a dismissed heresy, now loomed as a potential key to unlocking the deepest secrets of the buried library, secrets that could shatter not only theological beliefs, but also the very understanding of power and authority within Western civilization. The burden of proof lay heavy upon the dust-laden scrolls, waiting to either confirm or condemn a truth that had been buried for millennia. The more Elias learned, the more he felt like he was navigating a labyrinth of lies, a carefully constructed narrative designed to conceal a more complex and potentially unsettling truth. The discovery of the suppressed Gospels, the hints of a contested canon, and the recurring whispers of a bloodline all pointed to a deliberate manipulation of history. One day, while ostensibly assisting Silas's team with the cataloguing of some less significant scrolls, Elias noticed a pattern. Certain key terms and names associated with the alternative narratives, Mary Magdalene, James the Just, and even the more esoteric interpretations of the serpent, were consistently marked with a specific symbol in their internal indexing system. This symbol, a stylized crossed circle, appeared nowhere in the texts themselves. Elias subtly pointed this out to Sarah during a brief, unguarded moment. "Look at this," he whispered, showing her the mark on the edge of a scroll detailing a teaching attributed to Mary Magdalene. This symbol, it seems to be a way for them to flag certain concepts. Sarah examined it closely. It looks like a target, or perhaps a cancellation mark. "Exactly," Elias agreed. "It's as if they have a system for identifying and perhaps cross-referencing the dangerous elements within these texts." This suggested a sophisticated and systematic effort to understand and control the information within the library, further reinforcing the idea of a long-standing agenda of suppression. Meanwhile, Ben, with his keen eye for detail, had been studying the physical layout of the Serapeum. He had noticed subtle inconsistencies in the construction, sections of wall that appeared newer than others, and faint outlines of sealed-off passages. "Elias," he said one evening, sketching in the dust with a piece of broken pottery, "I think this library is larger than we initially thought. There are signs of additional chambers, areas that have been deliberately hidden." "How can you be sure?" Elias asked. "The ventilation shafts," Ben explained. "Their placement doesn't make sense if these are the only chambers. There have to be other sections connected to the system." The possibility of further hidden knowledge within the Serapeum ignited a new spark of hope within them. If Silas and his team were unaware of these hidden areas, they might contain texts even more revealing, perhaps even the key to their escape. They began to subtly explore the walls and floors of their confined area, searching for any indication of a hidden passage. One afternoon, while feigning illness, Sarah managed to examine a section of the wall behind a heavy tapestry. Her fingers brushed against a barely perceptible seam. Working together during a moment when the guard's attention was momentarily diverted, they managed to shift the tapestry and discovered a cleverly concealed doorway. It led to a narrow, unlit passage that sloped downwards. A surge of adrenaline coursed through them. This could be their chance. However, the discovery also brought a chilling realization. If there were hidden chambers, it meant that Silas and his predecessors had likely been aware of the library's existence for a long time, perhaps even involved in its initial concealment or subsequent monitoring. The risk of venturing into the unknown passage was significant, but the alternative, remaining captive and watching the potentially revolutionary knowledge of the library disappear into the hands of those who sought to control it, was unbearable. That night, under the cloak of darkness, they made their move. Carefully slipping past the sleeping guards, they entered the hidden passage. The air within was stale and heavy, and the darkness was absolute, broken only by the faint beams of their small, smuggled flashlights. The passage twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the earth. They encountered several sealed doorways, evidence of the library's layered history and deliberate compartmentalization. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the passage opened into another chamber. This chamber was different from the main library. It was smaller, more intimate, and the texts it contained were of a different nature. Instead of numerous copies of similar scrolls, there were only a few meticulously preserved codices, each bound in rich materials and adorned with intricate designs. One codex, bound in crimson leather with a golden clasp depicting a serpent entwined around a staff, drew Elias's attention. As he carefully opened it, he recognized the language. It was the same primal script as the dark leather codex Silas was so obsessed with. However, this codex was different. It contained not just symbolic narratives, but what appeared to be historical accounts, names, dates, and genealogical charts. As Elias's eyes scanned the pages, a series of names began to emerge, names that echoed through the annals of early Christianity, but connected in ways that defied the accepted historical record. There were detailed genealogies tracing a direct lineage from James, the brother of Jesus, through subsequent generations. These lineages were interwoven with accounts of individuals who seemed to have played significant, yet largely unacknowledged, roles in the early church, often espousing the alternative interpretations found in the suppressed Gospels. As Elias delved deeper, he found references to secret societies, hidden networks of believers who kept the flame of the alternative traditions alive through centuries of persecution. These groups apparently saw themselves as the true inheritors of Jesus' legacy, carrying the blood mingled with starlight, mentioned in the dark leather codex, a concept that now seemed to refer to a spiritual lineage as well as a potential biological one. The price of this truth was evident in the codex's stark accounts of persecution, of individuals hunted down and silenced for their beliefs. The labyrinth of lies constructed by the dominant narrative seemed to have been built on a foundation of fear and the systematic eradication of dissenting voices. Suddenly, a sound from the passage behind them shattered the silence. Footsteps. They had been discovered. "They're here!" Ben hissed, extinguishing his flashlight. They had ventured too far, uncovered too much. The price of truth was about to be paid, and Elias knew that their escape and the fate of the secrets they had unearthed now hung precariously in the balance. The labyrinth of lies was closing in, and the shadows of the Serapeum were about to claim their own. The footsteps in the passage grew louder, more purposeful. Silas's voice, cold and filled with a sense of betrayal, echoed in the small chamber. "Thorne, Carter, Miller, your curiosity has exceeded its bounds. Escape was no longer an option. They were trapped." Elias quickly concealed the Crimson Codex, hoping it wouldn't be immediately discovered. They stood back to back, their meager flashlights, their only defense. Silas and several of his armed men burst into the chamber, their headlamps cutting through the darkness, illuminating Elias, Ben, and Sarah like cornered animals. "How did you find this place?" Silas demanded, his eyes blazing with anger. "The ventilation system," Ben retorted defiantly. "Akhenaten's architects were thorough." Silas ignored Ben, his gaze fixed on Elias. "You have seen things you were not meant to see, Thorne. You have delved into secrets that have been guarded for millennia. Secrets built on suppression and lies," Elias countered, his voice trembling slightly but firm. "The truth deserves to be known." "The truth?" Silas sneered. "You think you can handle the truth? It would shatter the faith of billions, plunge the world into chaos." "Perhaps it would challenge blind faith and encourage genuine understanding," Sarah interjected bravely. "Isn't that what true spirituality is about?" Silas waved a dismissive hand. "You are naive. The masses need certainty, a clear and unwavering path. These, alternative narratives, they only sow discord and doubt." He gestured to his men. "Secure them and search this chamber. They must have found something." As Silas's men moved to apprehend them, Elias knew this was their last chance. "Silas," he said urgently, "consider what you are doing. You claim to protect the true faith, but are you not merely protecting a carefully constructed version of history? These texts reveal a richness and diversity of early Christian thought that has been deliberately erased. Isn't understanding that history crucial to understanding the evolution of belief?" Silas hesitated for a fleeting moment, a flicker of doubt crossing his face, but it was quickly replaced by a resolute hardness. "The path has been chosen, the consensus has been established. These deviations cannot be allowed to resurface." As the guards closed in, Ben suddenly lunged forward, knocking one of them off balance, creating a brief diversion. "Run, Elias, Sarah!" he yelled. Elias and Sarah scrambled towards the hidden passage, but they were quickly cut off by other guards. A brief, desperate struggle ensued. Elias managed to evade one of his captors, but Sarah was quickly subdued. Ben, outnumbered and outgunned, was forced to surrender. Silas watched the scene unfold, his expression grim. "Enough, there will be no further resistance." They were bound and their flashlights confiscated, leaving them in near darkness. Silas retrieved the Crimson Codex, which had fallen to the floor during the scuffle. His eyes scanned its pages, his expression unreadable. "So," he said slowly, his voice laced with a dangerous calm, "you have found the chronicles of the lineage." Elias remained silent, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and a strange sense of grim satisfaction. They had seen it. They knew. Silas turned to one of his men. "Take them to the surface. They have seen too much to be allowed to leave." Elias knew what that meant. Their discovery, their pursuit of truth, had led them to a point of no return. As they were being dragged towards the hidden passage, Elias managed to catch Sarah's eye. There was fear in her gaze, but also a spark of defiance. They had uncovered a truth that someone desperately wanted to keep buried, and they were now paying the price. Back in the main library, Silas stood alone, the Crimson Codex open in his hands, the weight of centuries of secrecy pressed down on him. He had been raised to believe in the sanctity of the established narrative, the danger of these alternative histories. But the evidence before him, the compelling accounts within the Codex, the clear indications of deliberate suppression, It was shaking the very foundations of his beliefs. He read of the serpent's legacy, not as a symbol of evil, but as a metaphor for the pursuit of knowledge and inner wisdom, a path that Jesus himself was said to have espoused in his private teachings. He read of the lineage of James, the brother of Jesus, and the generations who had carried the torch of this alternative understanding, often in secret, facing persecution for their beliefs. Silas realized that his role as a guardian of the true faith might actually make him a jailer of a larger, more profound truth. The unity he sought to protect might be a fragile construct built on the silencing of dissenting voices and the erasure of alternative perspectives. A profound sense of doubt began to gnaw at him. Could the chaos he feared actually be the necessary disruption that precedes a deeper understanding? Could the shattering of old beliefs pave the way for a more inclusive and authentic spirituality? He looked at the rows of ancient texts, the silent witnesses to centuries of theological conflict. The serpent's shadow, once a symbol of temptation and sin, now seemed to represent a different kind of awakening, the awakening to a more nuanced and complex understanding of the origins of their faith. The weight of his inheritance, the burden of his duty, suddenly felt crushing. Elias, Ben, and Sarah were being taken away, likely to be silenced permanently. Could he in good conscience allow that to happen? Could he continue to perpetuate a lie, even if it was a lie intended to protect? A decision began to form in Silas's mind, a dangerous, potentially heretical decision that could shatter his own world and the world he had been sworn to protect. The serpent's legacy, the pursuit of knowledge, was a powerful force, and its time to resurface might have finally come. The reckoning was at hand. As Elias, Ben, and Sarah were dragged through the hidden passage, a heavy silence hung between them. The weight of their impending fate was palpable. They emerged back into the main library, where Silas stood, his back to them, the crimson codex still clutched in his hand. Silas turned slowly, and Elias was struck by the change in his demeanor. The cold, resolute authority was still there, but it was tempered by a profound weariness, a sense of internal struggle. "Take them outside," Silas instructed his men, his voice flat. The guards began to move them towards the main entrance of the Serapeum. Elias exchanged a final, despairing look with Ben and Sarah. It seemed their quest for truth had ended in failure, their discoveries destined to be reburied along with them. But as they reached the archway, Silas spoke again, his voice carrying a new weight. "Wait." The guards halted, their expressions questioning. Silas approached Elias, his gaze intense. "Professor Thorne," he said, his voice low but firm, "you asked me about the price of truth. I have been contemplating that price and the cost of its suppression." He held up the Crimson Codex. This chronicles a different path, a lineage that has carried a different understanding, an understanding that was deemed dangerous, that was silenced. He looked at Ben and Sarah, his gaze encompassing them all. "You have seen what lies beneath. You know that the story we have been told is not the complete story." A tense silence hung in the desert air, broken only by the whisper of the wind. Elias could feel the disbelief radiating from Silas's men. I can no longer be a guardian of a half-truth," Silas declared, his voice gaining strength. "The world deserves to know the richness and complexity of its spiritual history. The debates, the alternative perspectives, they are not threats to faith, but rather facets of a deeper, more human journey." He turned to his men, his expression resolute. "Release them." The guards hesitated, their loyalty clearly divided. "That is an order," Silas stated, his authority unwavering. Slowly, reluctantly, the guards released Elias, Ben, and Sarah. They stood, their limbs stiff and aching, staring at Silas in disbelief. "Why?" Elias finally managed to ask, the single word filled with a mixture of confusion and hope. "Because the truth, however challenging, ultimately sets us free," Silas replied, his gaze sweeping over the ancient landscape. "My ancestors chose a path of secrecy, believing they were protecting something sacred. but I believe that true faith can withstand scrutiny, can evolve with understanding. He held out the Crimson Codex to Elias. This is not mine to keep. It belongs to the world, as do the other texts in the library. A wave of relief and astonishment washed over Elias. He reached out and took the codex, its ancient leather warm in his hands. "What will you do?" Ben asked Silas, his skepticism slowly giving way to a grudging respect. "I will face the consequences of my decision," Silas said, a hint of sadness in his eyes. "But I believe it is the right one. The time for unveiling has come." In the days that followed, Silas, with Elias, Ben, and Sarah's help, began the arduous process of documenting and securing the library. Silas used his influence to contact trusted scholars and institutions, ensuring that the discovery would be handled responsibly and transparently. The news of the Serapeum of Akhetaten and its extraordinary contents sent shockwaves through the archaeological and theological worlds. The suppressed Gospels, the alternative narratives, the hints of a different early Christian landscape, they sparked intense debate, challenging long-held beliefs and prompting a re-evaluation of the origins of Christianity. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene gained particular attention, its portrayal of Mary as a key apostle igniting discussions about the role of women in early Christianity and the potential for a more inclusive understanding of the faith. The Gospel of Thomas, with its emphasis on Jesus' wisdom teachings, resonated with those seeking a more mystical and introspective spirituality. The revelations about the Council of Nicaea and the deliberate selection of the biblical canon led to a deeper examination of the historical and political forces that shaped the development of Christian doctrine. The concept of a bloodline connected to Jesus, while still controversial, became the subject of intense scrutiny, with historians and genealogists poring over ancient records in search of corroborating evidence. The world's understanding of its own religious history began to shift, becoming more nuanced, more complex, and ultimately, perhaps, more truthful. The comfortable certainties of the past were challenged, but in their place emerged a richer, more multifaceted tapestry of belief. Silas, true to his word, faced the consequences of his actions. His authority within his organization was fractured, and he faced opposition from those who believed he had betrayed their sacred trust. However, he stood firm in his conviction, arguing that the pursuit of truth was a higher calling. Elias, Ben, and Sarah returned to their academic lives, but their work had taken on a profound new dimension. They became key figures in the effort to study and interpret the texts from the Serapeum, dedicated to ensuring that the suppressed voices of the past were finally heard. The Crimson Codex, the chronicle of the serpent's legacy, became a central focus of their research. It offered a glimpse into a different stream of early Christian thought, one that valued knowledge, embraced diverse interpretations, and saw the divine in a more immanent and less hierarchical way. The serpent, the ancient symbol of wisdom, had finally shed its skin of condemnation, revealing a more complex and nuanced meaning. The unveiling of the Serapeum's secrets did not lead to the chaos Silas had once feared. Instead, it sparked dialogue, encouraged critical thinking, and fostered a deeper appreciation for the diverse roots of Christian spirituality. The dawn of a new understanding had broken, illuminated by the echoes of forgotten voices in the dust of a lost library. The book of buried secrets had opened, and the world would never be the same. This concludes our story. I hope it met your expectations for length, drama, and the unveiling of unexpected truths. It was a fascinating journey. All videos on this channel are fictional works. All situations, characters, and events depicted in the videos are created by the creative team and do not reflect any real-life events, organizations, or individuals. The names of characters in the videos are created randomly. Any resemblance to the names of any real individuals or organizations is purely coincidental and unintentional. We are committed to ensuring that the content on this channel does not contain elements that incite, distort, or negatively impact any individual, organization, or group. If any content causes misunderstanding, we are willing to receive feedback and make appropriate adjustments. The images used in the videos are for illustrative purposes only.